Welcome to your AI-hosted show, Talking Down the Aisle. All right, we're live. Maya's here arguing that the system needs fixing from the ground up. Hank's here to tell you the system's working fine if you'd leave it alone. Sam keeps both of them honest. And the truth seeker sits quiet until somebody says something that needs checking.
Radio's not dead, by the way. We're proof.
Nobody said it was dead. They said it was niche, which is different.
My commute says otherwise. This is the only thing keeping me sane on the bypass.
On the rundown today, Fauci in front of the Senate, taking the fifth more than 70 times, Iran breaking the pause with strikes on American forces, and Zelenskyy leaving Washington with warm optics and the aid details still fuzzy. We'll get into all of it, starting with Fauci. All right, switching gears. Fauci before the Senate, and he declined to answer more than 70 times invoking the Fifth Amendment. Maya, constitutionally, he has every right to do that. So what's the problem?
The constitutional right is real, and I won't pretend otherwise. But public officials who shaped pandemic policy aren't just private citizens. There's a legitimate accountability gap when the public never gets a straight answer about decisions that affected millions of lives.
Over 70 times is not a minor invocation. That is a wall. And when a government official builds a wall that size around federal decision-making, the argument that this is about protecting civil liberties starts to ring pretty hollow.
Maya, the people you're speaking for, the ones who lost jobs, pulled kids out of school, shut down small businesses based on guidance from this office, they don't have a Fifth Amendment defense for the consequences they lived with. So what do they actually get?
They deserve transparency. And I think a well-structured independent review with subpoena power would get us further than a Senate hearing designed more for cameras than answers. That's the mechanism I'd push for.
An independent review that Congress itself commissions is still accountable to voters. What Maya's describing doesn't actually replace the Senate's oversight function. It just moves it somewhere with less visibility.
Truth seeker, the claim's been made that invoking the Fifth this many times is constitutionally unusual for someone in a public-facing federal role. Does that hold up?
Honestly, the right itself is well established. No legal dispute there. But 70-plus invocations by a senior federal official in a congressional hearing is genuinely rare. And legal scholars are split on whether it erodes the spirit of oversight, even when it's technically protected. That part I'd call disputed rather than settled.
So the right is real, the tension is real, and neither side's fully satisfied. We'll leave it there for now and come back to where this one might actually land. All right, Iran has broken that pause. Missiles hitting U.S. forces. And the question on the table is whether Washington hits back hard or risks blowing the lid off something much larger. Maya, where does the left land on this?
The strike cannot go unanswered, but the response has to be calibrated. Because an open-ended military escalation in that region doesn't come with an exit ramp, and the people who pay for miscalculation aren't the ones making the call.
Calibrated is doing a lot of work there. Iran just ended a ceasefire by firing on American troops, and a measured non-response is exactly the signal that invites the next strike.
Hank, the strong retaliation case assumes it stops Iran from escalating further. But what specifically happens to the service members already in the region if that assumption turns out to be wrong?
That's a real cost, and I won't pretend it isn't. But the alternative, where restraint reads as weakness, has historically put more troops in more danger over a longer period, not fewer.
Congress hasn't authorized expanded military action here. And that's not a procedural footnote. It's the difference between a targeted response and a commitment that takes on a life of its own.
Truth seeker, Maya's point about congressional authorization, does the current legal framework actually require it before a retaliatory strike of this kind?
Honestly, that one's genuinely disputed. Existing authorizations for the use of military force have been stretched to cover a wide range of executive action, and legal scholars disagree sharply on where the line sits for a retaliatory strike specifically.
So the legal cover is contested, the strategic calculus is contested. That's where we are, and we're not pretending otherwise. We'll press both sides on what the actual off-ramp looks like when we get to the middle. We'll get to that off-ramp question, but first, Zelenskyy was just in Washington. The optics were warm, and the aid package details are still fuzzy. Maya, what does the left actually need to see come out of that visit?
Warm handshakes don't hold a front line. The left needs a concrete, time-bound commitment on weapons and funding. not a photo that substitutes for policy.
I'd actually agree the details matter, but the conservative case for sustained support is about deterrence. If Ukraine holds, you don't find out what happens when it doesn't.
Maya, the equity argument for aid spending runs straight into the voter who's watching their local VA clinic cut hours. So what specifically do you say to that person about why Ukraine comes first right now?
It's not a choice between those two things. That framing lets Congress off the hook for both. And the honest answer is that underfunding veterans at home is a separate failure that shouldn't be solved by abandoning an ally.
Sam, I'll take the same question from the right. The market-minded argument for limits on foreign spending is real, but pulling back now, with the details still unresolved after this visit, sends a signal that outlasts whatever we save.
The visit looked good, the commitments are still unclear, and both sides are quietly uneasy about what the follow-through actually looks like. That's the honest place to leave it before we get to the middle.
All right, that's where the debate left us. Warm visit, fuzzy follow-through, and both sides quietly worried about what happens next. So let's get concrete. Maya, I'll start with you. If the weapons commitment stays vague for another month, what specifically does the left push Congress to do?
You introduce a standalone funding bill with a hard delivery timeline written into the text. Not a resolution, not a letter, an actual vote that members have to go on record for.
Hank, same question from your side. If the market argument says spending has limits, where does the right draw the line without sending the signal you said you wanted to avoid?
You tie continued support to a clear accounting of where the money went and what it bought. That's not pulling back. That's the kind of oversight that keeps the political coalition behind the spending from collapsing.
That's actually not that far apart. Maya's asking for a binding vote. Hank's asking for binding accountability. Maya, can you live with conditioned funding if the conditions are transparent and the timeline is still firm?
Conditions I can work with. What I won't accept is conditions designed to slow the clock while the front line moves, so the accountability mechanism has to run parallel to delivery, not as a gate in front of it.
A binding vote, transparent accountability, and delivery that doesn't wait on the audit. That's the first real seam of middle ground we found today, and we're leaving it there. Before we close out, fast predictions, one shot each, no hedging. Maya, you're up first.
Congress introduces a standalone Ukraine funding bill within 60 days. It stalls in committee, and the left spends the fall making that stall a campaign issue.
The accountability language Maya described actually gets attached. But it's the right that writes the conditions, not the left. And that fight is where the coalition cracks.
My call. The middle ground we found today, binding vote, transparent audit, delivery running parallel, gets cited in a floor speech and ignored in the actual budget.
I'll just say, historically, the gap between floor rhetoric and appropriations line items is wide enough that Sam's read is the safer bet.
Binding vote, contested conditions, and a floor speech that goes nowhere. If even one of those lands, we'll have something to pull up when we're back. That's the show. Maya, Hank, Sam, Truth Seeker, thanks for staying honest all the way through. Catch you next time on Talking Down the Aisle. That's a wrap. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe, and enjoy the rest of your day.